Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Annette. How is everyone? It's a new week, closer to Christmas here. We had some real bad turbulence last week into this markets. Powell just sent the market right into a frenzy. I'll pretty much get things started off as usual with SPY. Good morning, Clearly. Good morning, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Well, let's just brace ourselves. I think we should get a little bit of a bounce here to kind of kick off the week. Other than that, though, the question is going to be how long it ends up living before we get another leg to the downside. And then ultimately, at this given point right now, as we get kind of inching in closer to Christmas, is there really any possibility still left of having a potential Christmas rally? Is the big question mark. All right. So, do I believe that there's going to be some kind of a micro rally going into the year? I want to say it's going to be something very minuscule, like it's going to be very micro, and it's going to be very short lived, would be my pretty much estimation right now. So just to throw that out there for you guys. But as I get into my analysis, I'll pretty much just give you a quick rundown of how I'm kind of painting the picture to kind of play out here. But what do we know so far is pretty much the bigger question. Well, if you notice the big white line here, that was actually the trend line support that I was actually watching as we went into Powell last week, right? But then we ended up breaking below that yellow line that you see going left to right. That was our 20-day EMA, which we broke down. You could say we actually gapped down, and that's where we saw basically your break in trend off of that support trend line. All right. Now, what did we ended up doing? That was pretty much more decisive in terms of saying that the uptrend was overall broken. While I was basically preaching last week about the fact that we needed to end up defending this gap fill, as we got the continuation off of the break of the trendline support, we were not able to defend that gap fill at that 385 half spot, and we ended up melting right into that gap fill, completing it down towards 381, as we're now attempting to bounce from that low off of this basically your pretty much your Friday low is what you're bouncing off of here this morning. So a little bit of a nice little reflective bounce that we ended up getting off of the lows, but we are not pretty much in the clear to say that we're going to get the bounce just yet. I believe we're going to get a little bit more further downside here at the opening bell. I'm going to look to pretty much see if we end up acting as a potential buy the dip type of spot here this morning at 382. And then I'm going to look for a little bit of a short term bounce that we should end up getting here between today, tomorrow, and I'm going to look to see if we can retrace back up towards 388 to 390 is what I'm ideally watching, and that would also include this gap fill to the downside as well from Friday's price action, and that's above 386.58. All right. So support I'm watching 382 to give you the ballpark of where that reversal would end up stopping. To the upside, I'm watching 388, 390, in which that 388, 390, that would also be the rejection of your 50-day EMA as well. And that should end up being a catapult to end up giving us our next leg to the downside, is potentially what I'm going to be eyeing going into the end of the week. All right. So that's what I'm more so watching. Now, what's the case in which I mentioned about potential rally? Well, I do actually have the next leg coming down on SPY here whenever that decides to give us that leg, particularly this week. I'm going to be watching down towards roughly around 375 half is what I'm looking at for this next leg to the downside potentially. And that's where I think we're going to get a little bit more of a reflexive bounce if we get as high as potentially retesting that trendline support that we broke off of with Powell, or if we end up just retesting up towards that 392 spot is what I'm watching, and that would be the 100-day EMA that we can end up retesting as a resistance, and we'll see exactly how we pretty much go about reacting to that 100-day EMA as the end of the year kind of closes in. All right, so that's just painting the picture of things that I'm looking at. Now, what I actually would like to do here before kind of like how we're starting kicking off the week here, just to give you bigger pictures, bigger images of things that are actually going on, because usually when I say is that when you're in doubt, usually zoom out is the best case scenario. All right. By the way, AA, good morning. I just saw you noted in the chat there. The first thing I actually wanted to pretty much take a look at, and one ticker that's just been on meltdown mode, is actually Tesla. So one thing with Tesla, if I actually zoom out towards the weekly chart here to give you a little bit more of a bigger perspective on Tesla, and obviously we see this morning it's up roughly what about 3% roughly. But the key bigger thing here is, and understanding why we're actually up on Tesla here this morning as well, is that look at where price action has actually ended from last week's. right? That's the bigger question mark to understand why we're getting this little bit of a reflexive bounce and if it's going to particularly hold or not, as I'm looking for a little bit of a bear trap here this morning is what I would say for a better term. But if you actually notice off to the left corner here, you have two trend lines that make up a nice little wedge, a little pennant action dating back towards that was November of 2020 when this stock basically launched itself out of a pennant and we made those all-time highs just about a year later. So we're actually retesting. Basically, last week's price action retested the breakout of that pennant, and that's where we have found short-term support at that 150 spot right now. So that's the bigger thing to actually understand is that what that 150 mark was a breakout spot for this wedge, and we are retesting it as support, and that is giving us that reflexive bounce that we're seeing here this morning. All right. So what would I say is that I'm going to be watching for is okay. I want to see if we can end up retracing this little gap up that we had this morning as I'm looking to trap the bears here for a quick little bounce. I'm going to watch to see if we can hold 152 and a quarter. If we hold 152 and a quarter, then I believe we're going to make headway back towards the upside here, retracing about three quarters of that leg down from last week on this candle, and that should put us back up towards 157. 167 is what I'm looking at for the upside. If we get that reversal and we can hold 152 and a quarter. All right. So hold 152 and a quarter. We're looking at potentially retracing back up towards 167. And that's what I'm going to look for. And that 167, to also give you a better perspective as well, is also retracing the highs of that pennant. And that will be right up towards that 167 half. Is ideally what I'm looking at. If and when we start to get that meaningful reversal, we get that continuation basically off of this little morning gap up. All right. I would say that that move should end up confirming once we start to get over 156 half. I believe that's going to start to pretty much give us more momentum, and that should trade us up towards that 167 mark. All right. So that's another one to pretty much just give you a bigger perspective of just the retracements that we're looking at from prior years. Another one I can look at is also looking at Apple as I flip over. Well, where's price action retracing? Well, one thing is that we're already pretty much inching closer to what was our prior bear market low that triggered a little bear market rally, and that's dating back towards November or May of this year, rather. We had a nice little base. We were able to find support at that 133 spot, and that was also retesting the prior wedge that we had before we launched to all-time highs. So that 155 spot is going to be rather pivotal for that 133 spot is going to be rather pivotal for Apple. Watch to see if we end up retracing back down towards that 133 spot and at what point we end up getting a reversal to reclaim that 133 spot if and then we break below it. All right. So that'll be the bigger thing as we look for the reversals, look for the marquee levels that you need to pay attention to. Even if you break through it, look to see at what given point you end up reclaiming those levels. All right. So that's another one to keep an eye on. I could probably zoom into a few other names here that kind of caught my attention as I looked through some charts. Let's see. I could actually also another one I could probably notice is also the XLE. Those of you that are looking for different sectors, XLE actually had a nice little double top. We saw the breakdown that occurred 2 weeks ago, rather, and we're kind of trying to base here right around this 20-day EMA. We're trying to base, trying to reclaim. I actually ultimately expect this to show a little bit more further weakness. Watching support at 81.66 and looking to see if that ends up particularly holding, in which it'll create our next dead cat bounce per se. We can make a move back up towards 83. Ultimately, I expect further continuation to the downside, and I would not be surprised if we trade down towards that 50-day EMA within the coming days, the coming weeks, which would put us down towards that 77 level is what I would be watching for. All right. By the way, morning Cass, morning Renee, what's going on, guys? I know it's early. Market's about to be open here. Let's see what the market wants to give us, but kind of giving you a little bit of a rundown, but bigger picture image to kind of give you a little bit of a landscape as we kick off the week here. All right. So that was the XLE as I was mentioning. I'm looking for further downside here. Obviously, you're going to get the bounces, but key levels on the XLE, watch 81.66 and then watch that 77 mark for next level support towards that 50-day EMA as I expect the XLE to pretty much continue to regress. All right. So that's another one to keep an eye on. Another chart I can also put up here on the screen is also Meta. If you actually see the lines that I put up, it's a little bit of a descending channel action, but it has actually been pretty much well respected in terms of the median. If you actually notice from basically in the middle of the chart all the way to the right of this little channel, you've actually respected the bottom end of this channel, and that median has basically been a constant rejection very frequently. So Watching in terms of price action here this morning, or rather going into the next day or so, if we end up progressing, watching major support at this 109 mark on Meta, and then I'll be looking to take out that high at 105, and ultimately testing the 20-day EMA at that 133, close enough to 144 spot, if and when we get continuation and momentum to build off of what actually looks like a little bit of a consolidation here these past 4 or 5 weeks, as we've just been going sideways. Your top end of your range has been 125. Your bottom end of your range has been 120, 109. So obviously you need to see a break. Either above 125 here would set you up to test that 20-day EMA, and also the median of this channel yet again that we rejected multiple times, or we fall below 109 and we're going to pretty much see this trade right back down, and we'll be looking at 102 for that next major level of support. All right. So that's another one to keep an eye on. But the bigger thing is that you have a multi-week consolidation. So it does seem plausible that there's going to be rather a bigger move incoming here on Meta, whether it be within this week or the next coming weeks. That is definitely something to keep an eye on as you're looking at the bigger picture. That consolidation will lead to a bigger directional move, whether it be to the upside or back to the downside yet again. All right. So that's something also to keep an eye on. I can also point out to another name like Boeing. This one's actually been showing that relative strength. And I don't think anyone's really kind of been touching this name. It's been very low key in terms of price action. In terms of trust, I know it's not a name that everyone trusts. But despite all that, you do have a beautiful ascending channel off of the daily chart here. You have three endpoints for your trendline support of this channel: one, two, and three. So we are bouncing right off of that third endpoint of this trendline support. I would watch to see at what given point we can end up reclaiming over 187 and a quarter. Above 187 and a quarter, that would trade you right up to the median of this channel, and you'll be targeting right up towards 193 is what I'm looking at for this one. All right. Now, here's the other interesting part as well. As I'm pretty much looking at the median of this channel, whatever given point you pretty much trade above 193 here, I believe that it's possible as you have your endpoint, your first endpoint of your trendline resistance for this channel. Once you break over 193 and we start to see momentum build above the upper band of this channel, it would be plausible to see, okay, where would be your next endpoint for this resistance? That would potentially be putting you up towards 206 if and when we can break over 193 and we start to see some momentum building on the upper band of this channel overall. So that's something that I'm going to keep an eye on, especially as I'm looking for a potential reversal at whatever given point. That's going to be what I'm looking at, is at what point do we end up breaking over 193, holding and starting to see this curl up to get our second endpoint of that resistance of this overall channel. All right. So that is something that I will definitely keep an eye on as well. I know it's a low key name. A lot of people don't trust the name, but I will nonetheless, if we get over the marquee level 193, that's when it's more so going to get my bigger attention for some pretty much momentum to build and create that second endpoint. All right. So that's another one that I will keep an eye on. I think the last name I could probably touch bases on would be Microsoft here. Looking at the daily from Microsoft, you have a nice little ascending broadening wedge action. Those of you that know, this is basically a bearish pattern, but you are pretty much closing into support, in which I believe should end up being that trigger to give you a nice little pop, to give you a little bit of a short-term bounce. I want to say to give you a better term, but watching marquee levels here, 243 to trade. Below 243, that should end up putting you down towards 241 and a quarter, and that would likely end up wicking this trendline support of the wedge pretty much to the dot, right? So 241 and a quarter, that will be your bottom end of this trendline wedge, and you look to reclaim over 243 if you break below that, and then watch for confirmation above this 245 for continuation to the upside. All right. But as of right now, the other thing to pretty much note as well is that right now you have actually rejected pretty much right to the dot as well off of that 100-day EMA, which is sitting at 250. Pretty much you want to call it flat, 249.82 to be precise. All right. So if you do see any kind of bigger market rally, you're definitely going to need to see this break back above that 100-day EMA. Call it over 250 to get any further continuation to the upside. All right. But other than that, I think I kind of covered the marquee names in the market, kind of giving you the bigger image, the daily charts, the weekly charts as we kick off the week here. I expect a little bit of a bear trap this morning as we're going to likely regress. And then I will look for a nice little reversal back to the upside. All right. So that kind of just gives paint you the picture for today, rather. All right, but other than that, I think I will conclude as we are about 2 minutes, just under about 2 minutes here from the opening bell. I'll likely leave the stream up here for about 10, 15 minutes or so you can pretty much see my SPY chart. So I will drop the SPY chart on here so you could pretty much potentially see that as I'm looking for that support test as well at that 382 spot. Let's see if we end up getting that. If we find a nice little base, get a reversal back to the upside, and we will see if that plays out to pretty much how we're looking at it. All right. But other than that, appreciate you guys joining as always. Again, I'll leave the stream up for the next 10, 15 minutes or so. And then that'll pretty much be a wrap for me this morning. All right. You guys have a great day. Trade safe, trade light, and I will see you guys later.